Hi, my name is Linda, and I'm an alcoholic. It's super good to be here. Um, Zoom is a funny anomaly, but I'm super grateful that Alcoholics Anonymous has really embraced it and moved forward with life on life's terms. And a lot of times for me, like prayer meditation is about trying to find acceptance with life on life's terms. I really want to thank Teresa for asking me. I love Alcoholics Anonymous. I'll tell you that I didn't feel that way when I came here. If you're new to Alcoholics Anonymous, I want to welcome you. I want to tell you that Alcoholics Anonymous works no matter what. And I have direct experience with that. I turned 22 years sober on September 8th. And, I thought that at 22 years of sobriety, my life would look different. I'd be married to the perfect man and live in the perfect house and have the perfect life. And that is not what has happened to me. I do have the perfect life, but it didn't look like what I thought it would look like. And I'm just going to briefly tell you what my life looked like when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous. So if you're new, you have a chance to identify. When I came here, I didn't believe I was an alcoholic. I didn't believe I had a problem. I had a little 10-year-old who was attempting suicide. I had a 15-year-old son that was being arrested on a weekly basis. I had a 15-year-old stepson that was beating up on people and stealing cars. I had a 17-year-old stepdaughter that was pregnant with twins. And my husband was barricaded in the bedroom for 2.5 months with the doors and the windows screwed shut with a loaded semi-automatic rifle. And I didn't think I belonged here. Like, I came to Alcoholics Anonymous and I heard your stories and I thought, you guys have some major problems going on. And if I get as bad as you, I'll check myself in. But the truth is that I got this. And I didn't, but I didn't know that. I believe that my problem was him. My problem was not my drinking. But I've come to learn that that is not true. I made a lot of wreckage when I was out there. So I had to do a lot of cleanup when I came in here. And it took me a long, long time. And prayer and meditation was critical for me. I'll tell you that I started my journey in Al-Anon. So I'm in Al-Anon because he's my problem. And I'm doing a lot of praying. I'm sure I was meditating in some fashion, but I was still drinking and using, and I was crazy. And but I was praying because I knew there was something wrong with our life. My daughter and I would hide in the closet when my husband would come out of that bedroom in the middle of the night because he was violent. And I didn't know how to get out of that situation. When my daughter attempted suicide, that's really when I knew I had to do something different because she wasn't going to survive my life. And again, I did not think that my drinking was my problem. But that's really when I started to really pray to a God of my understanding. And I remember that I stood in my living room and I said, you know what, God, I don't know if you're real and I don't know if you're out there, but something's not quite right in my life. And I'm going to step off this cliff here and I hope that you're there to catch me. And that's what I did. And for me, what it felt like is like I just stopped rebuilding the house of cards, because my life really was like a house of cards, and it blew down as easily as a house of cards blew down. And I would just quickly scramble and build it back up, and then it would collapse again. And I just didn't understand that. And I took my hands off of my life. And it was shortly after that that my daughter attempted suicide. And I remember I'm sitting on my couch. And the reason why I picked Thy Will Not Mine Be Done is what I have learned is when I pray and ask my God for help, most of the time, it doesn't look like what I think it should look like. And a lot of the times I don't like it. But what I know is if I can sit through those feelings, if I can just hang on, sometimes by my fingertips, when I get to the other side, I get to see the blessings of it. So my first real spiritual awakening from praying was that night. And I went to get up off the couch and run into the other room to rescue my daughter. And what happened is I felt God's hand settle on top of my head. And I sat back down on that couch and I couldn't get up. And what I heard my God say to me is, if you rescue her, she will attempt suicide again and again and again. Allow this to happen. You can take her to the hospital. You'll have her stomach pumped and everything will be all right. And there was a sense of peace over me that I knew was not me. And I sat on that couch and I said to my daughter, I love you and I'm here for you. And eventually she put that bottle of pills down and she came out into that living room and she crawled into my lap and she cried. And she told me some stories of some things that were going on with her, because not a lot of people at 10 years old are going to commit suicide because life is all hunky-dory. And that next day, because of prayer, I called the police because I knew that my daughter needed a lot more help than I could give to her. And I'll tell you that I'm not even sober yet. And prior to that experience, I'm not being responsible in my life. Like, I'm a terrible mom. I don't take care of my kids. I allow very dangerous men in their life. But I know that that was a direct result of prayer and meditation. And my daughter had to do some work on that, and that's her journey. And it was shortly after that that I found myself in Alcoholics Anonymous. And again, the next thing that happened in my life is on February 14th, 1998. It was a Saturday. And my husband had taken the screws out of the doors and the windows, and well, actually just out of the doors. And we were kind of communicating. And I thought, okay, well, this is progress. And then, I don't know, maybe an hour, hour and a half later, things went south very, very quickly. And my husband went to throw me out the door, and my son was standing in the window, and I said to him, calm as can be, and I said, please dial 911. And so he did. And the police came, and before you know it, there were 9 cop cars there because I told them he had a semi-automatic rifle in the room. And the police extracted him and arrested him. And it wasn't a very nice arrest. And I remember saying to God at the time, hey, dude, like, I know I asked for help, but this is way over the top. Like, couldn't you have done this the easier, softer way? Like, I don't want this kind of help. And, luckily God is not swayed by my feelings, because he continued down that path. And that man went to jail that day. And 2 days later, I found myself in AA. And, I did a lot of praying, not meditating. I really couldn't sit quietly for even probably 10 seconds, 15 seconds. I just couldn't do it when I was first sober. But what I did was a lot of prayer. And what my sponsor would tell me is, we do a lot more meditation than we think. It's my concept of meditation that sometimes needs to be adjusted. So if I'm vacuuming my house at 30 days sober, and I'm really trying to listen to what my higher power is telling me, my sponsor tells me that's a form of meditation. And eventually I got to the point where I didn't have to always have activity and noise and the TV going. I could sit quietly in that house. And I knew I was starting to recover when that would happen. When I was first sober, that boy of mine, I told you he was being arrested on a weekly basis. So, he was very disturbed. And I had to do a tremendous amount of praying there. My sponsor told me that my son needed a lot more help than I could give to him, and that it was selfish and self-centered for me not to give up custody of him to the courts so that he could have a life. And I remember telling my sponsor, like, I'm only 30 days sober. Like, what you're asking from me is way too much. And my sponsor said, you have to trust God. And so I would do a lot of prayer. And what would happen is, what happened is my son got arrested, and someone had suggested, I don't know about those of you who have minor kids, but the police want you to come get your kids when they get arrested. That's the deal. And if you don't come get your kids, they'll tell you, we'll charge you child support if you don't come get your kids. And so I say to the officer, he calls me and he says, your son was arrested for a felony. And I was like, oh, wow, like he's only 15. And I said, well, what happened? And he said he stole a baseball cap off a kid's head. And I had to bite my tongue because I knew that God was working. It's like, took a baseball cap off a kid's head. That's not a felony. And so I said to the officer, okay, I'm not going to come get him. And I fully expected the officer to argue with me and say what everyone told me he would say, which is, if you don't come get your kid, he's a minor, we're going to charge you child support. And what he said to me was, no problem, I'll check juvenile hall and see if there's a bed. And again, like, there's God's will. And it didn't look like what I wanted it to look like, I'll tell you that. And, that has really been my experience in a lot of things in my life. I've had a lot of difficulties with that boy of mine. And if it wasn't for God, there's absolutely no way that I could do the things that I was, the choices that I had to make. What my sponsor said to me is, you have to be a good parent, and you have to do the right thing no matter what. No matter what the cost is to you, you have to do the right thing. And my son has had a very difficult path. And since he was 15, he's primarily been homeless or institutionalized. And he's 38 now. And there are so many times that I would be on my knees asking God, like, please direct me. Please tell me what to do. And God would put people in my life. mostly people from Alcoholics Anonymous, and you would say things that I absolutely had no doubt were coming from God. And it would happen time and time and time again. I remember one time that my son was in a very bad domestic violent relationship, and my son suffers from heavy mental illness. And my son has learned that if I call mom and I ask her for help, she's gonna tell me no. And this particular time he calls me and he says to me, "You gotta get me out of here. Like, I'm in big trouble." And I noticed that his conversation with me is very different. And I start praying. I start asking God for help. And the next day, out of the blue, I set up a lunch date with someone. I don't know her very well. I go to lunch with her, and she's in AA. She's a long time sober. And I tell her a little bit about what I'm struggling through with my son. And she says to me, "I'm a social worker of homeless people, and your son is in dire trouble, and you need to help him." And I was pissed. I was really mad, because the truth is, it was easier for me to not help my son than it was to help my son. But I knew what God wanted from me is to help him. And so that's what I did. And we got him out of that. And, you know, I mean, he didn't necessarily get better from there, but he did get different. And that's what I mean by, you know, God's will doesn't always look like what I think that it should look like. And, you know, a few years back, I left LA because my son's mental illness had progressed to the point that it was just dangerous. And we had a shotgun incident, and then there was a SWAT team incident. And between me and my sponsor, it was like, you know, you can't be here anymore. And Alcoholics Anonymous had given me the gift of a job. I'm a high school dropout, but I was an executive in LA. I made a lot of money. I owned a home. You know, it was the only place I've ever lived. I got sober there. I had a big fellowship. I sponsored a lot of people. And I had to walk away from all that. And I'll tell you, if that doesn't make you rely on a power greater than you, I don't know what will. And I remember that, you know, as alcoholics, when we have to make a big decision, we weigh all the pros and cons, and then we chew on it. And we wake up in the middle of the night and we obsess over it. And we know we got to make the right decision. And I don't know what the right decision is. And if I don't make the right decision, my whole life is going to fall apart. And you just get sicker and sicker and sicker. And you can't sleep at night. And maybe you eat too much or you don't eat enough. And, you know, like we just get nutty, or at least I do. And what I've learned is that I go to God, I give my problems to God, and then I go be of service and help somebody else. And it's the only thing that works, because when I think about you, I'm not thinking about me. So I'm thinking about this like, oh, this is a big decision. I'm leaving this big job. I'm never going to get a job like this again. Now I've pushed God completely out of the picture. He got me the job in the first place. But now that I'm like, you know, 18, 19 years sober, it's my job to get a job, not God's job. I don't need you anymore. Thank you very much. I know you've done a fabulous job, but I've got this. And I'm chewing on this and I'm scared. And then finally, I call my daughter and I say, okay, on October 31st, I'm going to resign my job. And it's like October 6th or something. And she said, why that date? And I said, because if I don't make a decision one way or another, it's gonna keep me up forever. So by October 31st, I'm gonna resign my job. And if God doesn't want me to, he'll fix it. And I hang up the phone and I say a prayer and I'm like, God, like, hit me over the head with a baseball bat. Like, make a banner, like make this so clear that I don't have any doubt. And I've already had a lot of experience with God that he will put barricades in front of me. I can knock him down, but if I pay attention to him, I'll find God's will. And within 20 minutes, my boss calls me. And he says to me, I want to do your review on October 31st. And my heart stopped beating because I knew, like, God is opening that door. Now I'm still unsure what I'm supposed to do. So on October 31st, sick to my stomach, I get on my knees again and I say, God, if you don't want me to resign my job, let my boss get in a car accident, let a problem happen at a facility, let this meeting that we are going to have not happen. And God didn't change the path. And I walked into that meeting and I gave my boss 6 months notice and I finished out those 6 months. And I live a life today that I never dreamed possible. I live a life of freedom that absolutely amazes me. And it only came about because I took that leap of faith. You know, I left that job, I sold my house, I threw on a backpack, I went overseas because I knew, like, if I didn't put some physical space between me and my son and my job, I'm going back. Like, my boss is going to call me. He called me every day. Are you sure you won't change your decision? Are you sure you won't stay? Because, you know, you raised me to now be a good employee, and he doesn't want to lose me. And I know that if I leave my son, the chances of him dying are so great, and that pains me so much. So I fly as far away as I can get, and I go to meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous over there. And what happens is I talk about those things over there, and I don't do that because I want to. I do that because I have to. Because, like, my pain is so big and so great. And you know what happened? God followed me over there. Because those people in Alcoholics Anonymous said to me the same stuff that you'd say to me here. You're doing the right thing. I believe that this is where God wants you to be. You just have to trust. The doors wouldn't have opened if it wasn't meant to happen. And I got through that. And, you know, I was working on a little farm. I don't know how I went from an executive to a farm worker, but I did. And it was so fun. I was taking care of these goats and chickens, and I had no structure. Like, I didn't have to be at the office at 8 a.m. And I got up and I watched these hot air balloons fly over the farm, and it was just amazing. And my daughter was like, oh, like, she kept telling me, I want you to come to Colorado and live here. And I hadn't lived around my daughter for 13 years. Like, I came and visited her a lot, but I didn't live near her. And my daughter is just a normal human. And like, it scares me. She's married to this really great guy. He doesn't beat her up. He's just kind and loving to her. He just wants to make her life easy. They live in this little 2-bedroom place. They got daisies painted on the wall. They took care of this little blind dog, and she belongs to a book club. And I remember I go to my sponsor and I'm like, my daughter wants me to come and live near her. And my sponsor's like, oh, I think that's a great idea. I said, no, I don't think that's a very good idea. She's like, she's not going to want me. Like, once I'm there for any length of time, she'll realize how absolutely crazy I am, and she'll just close the door on me. And my sponsor said, well, why don't you just go and try? I said, no, I'm too afraid. And then I tell my sponsor about this book club. I said, she's kind of weird. She belongs to this book club. All these girls get together, they read this book, and then they talk about it when they're done with it. And she looks at me like I had lost my mind. And she says to me, Linda, you belong to a book club. And I said, I do? She said, yeah, every time you go to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous and read the 12 and 12 or the big book and you talk about it, you're in a book club. And I was like, oh, wow, I didn't realize that. So I tell my daughter, okay, I'll move to Colorado. And then what I do is I start booking activities. And I got to do this. And so I tell my daughter, okay, I'll come in November. And then something comes up and I'm like, oh, well, I got to take advantage of this opportunity. So I'll come in December. And then I'll come in February. And I'll come in March. And what happened is I had a stroke on that farm. And I call my daughter in a blackout and I tell her, I don't know where I'm at. I don't know what's going on. There's a bunch of chickens here. They don't have any feathers. There's goats all over the place. How come I'm not at work? And my daughter calls 911 and the paramedics come and my daughter hops on a plane and she flies to where I'm at. And she says to me, your travel days are over. You're coming home with me. And I say to her, oh, no. I got all these activities planned. And she said, you go call your sponsor. So I do. I go call my sponsor. My sponsor said, yeah, you're going to Colorado. You just had a stroke. That's your most important priority, is to deal with that. And I'm like, no, I'm fine. If you're an alcoholic like I'm an alcoholic, you could chop off my leg and I'm fine. Let me get to where I'm going. There's self-will if you ever seen it. So I came to Colorado, and what has happened is I have this beautiful relationship with my daughter and my son-in-law, and I never would have experienced it. And it was tough at first. When I first got here, I lived with my daughter and I was a mess. I couldn't drive because of the stroke. I couldn't figure out the streets. I got lost in the turnaround all the time. I would just sit on the street corner and just bawl my eyes out. And then I would go to AA because you were safe. And the people at the AA clubhouse thought I was new because I was riding a bicycle in the snow and I couldn't drive. And they'd say, oh, are you new? And I'd say, no, I'm 19 years sober. And it was just comical. And, my daughter and my son-in-law lost their job in this pandemic because they're in the hospitality world. And my daughter has been out of work now for 8 months. And the other day we're in Costco, and this may not seem like a big deal to you, but it's a big deal to me. We were in Costco, and my little girl, she lays her head down on my shoulder and she just starts to cry. And I just sat there and held her and didn't say anything because Alcoholics Anonymous has taught me, keep your mouth shut and don't make it about you. And she finished crying and we paid for whatever we were paying for and we went home. And the next day she calls me and she says to me, I want to say thank you for just letting me cry yesterday and not saying anything. You made it a safe place for me, Mom. And I'm very grateful for that. Now, I'll tell you, when I got sober in Alcoholics Anonymous, my little girl at 10 years of age told me she would hate me for the rest of my life, that she would never forgive me for the damage I had done to her and her brother. Now, if that's not a power greater than me, I don't know what is. Due to prayer and meditation, like asking God for help, sometimes God's sending you to help me, and then listening. I get to have a relationship with my daughter today that I never thought possible. I don't know how things like that happen to an alcoholic of my variety. I don't. Except by a power much, much greater than me. I believe today, I don't know if God made me have that stroke or not, but I certainly believe he used that stroke to get me to Colorado because I wasn't coming. And I sponsor people here, and I got involved. The fellowship I craved built up around me. And when that pandemic happened, Zoom started. I'm 19, 20 years sober. I'm not going to Zoom. Like, that's not how I got sober. That's not Alcoholics Anonymous. How's the newcomer gonna find Zoom? There I go again. I forgot all about God. Like, he's not powerful enough to bring the newcomers to Zoom. I'm not coming to Zoom. And I'm sitting in my little apartment wondering what's gonna happen here. And a new lady knocks on my door, and I open the door, and her eyes are big as saucers. And she's like, I just got laid off from my job. I work at a restaurant, and I don't know how I'm going to stay sober. She's like a couple months sober. And I look at her, and I'm like, all right, God, I'm listening. And I say to her, we're going to go to Zoom meetings. And we're going to find service work to do. And she got involved and I think she started 5 Zoom meetings that week. I was like, yeah, that newcomer enthusiasm. Eventually, after a month, I'm like, you need to get some help here and let some other people run the Zoom meetings. And her and I sat in my apartment and we sewed masks. We sewed almost 400 masks. We passed them out in the community. And what she got to learn was service work at a different level. And I know that's God. I know that that is a direct result of prayer and meditating. Because if I'm not a clear channel and listen to God, when she knocked on my door and said, how am I going to stay sober? I would have said, go ask your sponsor. I'm not responsible for you. But because I have a clear channel to my higher power, what came to me was, well, we're going to go to Zoom. That's what we're going to do. So, sometimes God's will doesn't look like how I want it to be. And I'm grateful for that today. I'm going to end with this just because I don't want to talk about it. That boy of mine on Thanksgiving, he's still in LA. He knows I'm in Colorado, but he doesn't have my address here. And he got arrested on Thanksgiving for a very serious crime. He got arrested for arson. And he went to court today, and he calls me and he says, they're going to release me on OR, which means that they're going to release him basically to himself with the belief that he's going to show back up in court. And I think to myself, dude, you're homeless. Like, you have nothing. How is this possible that the court systems would do that? And he said, well, I didn't say that. I just said, how's that possible? And he said, because of COVID. And I was like, okay. And I got off the phone with him and I got on my knees and I just prayed. And I didn't pray for him to stay in jail or don't stay in jail, or if he got out of jail, go to rehab. What I prayed is, you know what, God, whatever you decide here, let me be in acceptance. Let me find your will. Let me release my will and just do it your way. And about a half hour later, someone in the, district attorney or some office called me and asked me a bunch of questions, and I told the truth to those questions. And I don't know if they're going to let him out or not let him out, and I don't know what's going to happen. But what I do know is I've given it to God. And my job is now to just do that meditation and find the humans that God wants me to help. Because what God says to me is, I'll deal with this. Like, you can't do anything about this. You can't do anything about the court system. You can't do anything about your son's mental illness. You guys aren't even in the same state. So you just go help the kids I put in your life, and I'll take care of this over there. And I know sometimes that doesn't look like the way I want it to look like. But I do know that if I sit quietly long enough, it'll always turn out better than anything I could have done by myself. Very grateful for Alcoholics Anonymous. Alcoholics Anonymous has made me into the very thing I have never, ever wanted to be, a lady. Thank you.